We're sharing a work of global history, Empire of Cotton by Harvard history professor Sven Beckert. The book was awarded the 2015 Bancroft Prize. You may not be familiar with this award, but it's considered the highest honor for works of American history, bestowed upon outstanding books on the history or diplomacy of the Americas. In the year of its release, it became the best-selling work of professional history in the United States. It tells the story of cotton, a material we couldn't be more familiar with, yet it also uncovers a dramatic history of the rise of capitalism, a history steeped in blood and violence, hidden behind the most common fabric we wear today. The existence of cotton products now seems like a given. From the clothes against our skin and the bedding we sleep in at night to even our paper currency, books, cooking oil, and soap, cotton is woven into the fabric of our lives. But have you ever tried to imagine a world without it? In the morning, you would wake from a bed lined with fur or straw and pull on heavy woolen garments. In summer, you might switch to linen or silk, but only if you were wealthy. Silk is not only expensive but also incredibly difficult to clean, meaning you couldn't change your clothes often, and they would inevitably carry an odor. You would spend your days in these coarse garments, enduring itchy skin. To produce enough wool for everyone, the world would need to raise 7 billion sheep, requiring approximately 700 million hectares of pasture, an area 1.6 times the size of the European Union today. Therefore, it's no exaggeration to say that among all the natural fibers used for clothing and warmth, cotton is the undisputed champion. Silk is too delicate, wool too heavy, and linen fibers are short and difficult to dye. Only cotton, warm, soft, with pliable fibers that are easy to dye, offers an exceptional combination of quality and value, perfectly meeting the clothing needs of diverse climates and populations around the globe. Without cotton, we would not have the modern, civilized life we know today. Every one of us lives within a vast empire of cotton. Before we delve into the book, let us consider a news story from 2016. That November, Bloomberg reported that Walmart and its Indian supplier were facing a lawsuit over counterfeit luxury bedsheets. The sheets were marketed as being made of Egyptian long staple cotton, but testing revealed they were blended with a significant amount of inferior cotton produced in India. We know that high-quality cotton is itself a luxury raw material. A Sea Island cotton t-shirt can sell for over $100, while an Egyptian cotton one might cost $50 or $60. However, the annual production of Egyptian cotton is only about 100,000 bales. Industry experts point out that 90% of the Egyptian cotton products on the market are fake. This fakery involves blending in Indian cotton, which costs only half as much, a common practice among Indian suppliers. So, why was Walmart's supplier an Indian company? What cold, bloody story lies behind the warm cotton products that envelop us? Empire of Cotton reveals the answers. Though it is a serious work of history, its protagonist is immaculately white and soft. The author, Sven Beckert, is one of America's most influential contemporary historians and a student of the renowned historian Eric Foner. With deep expertise in the history of capitalism and 19th-century urban history, he also serves as the organizer of Harvard's program on the study of capitalism. Using cotton as a guiding thread, Beckert transcends traditional historical methods bounded by nation, region, or class. He untangles the complex relationship between cotton and the global capitalist network, narrating how cotton evolved from a scattered crop into the lifeblood of global capitalism, connecting the fates of disparate groups like the textile workers of Manchester, the black slaves of the American South, and the post-colonial farmers of Central Asia. In his introduction, Beckert writes, "The purpose of this book is to solve a great puzzle through the story of cotton. Where did the modern world come from? This question can be expanded into a series of inquiries. Why is our world the way it is today? How did the global village form, and why does a clear hierarchy exist within it? Why do most of us need to sell our labor and then use our wages to purchase the fruits of others' labor? Why do we all live within an invisible sphere of capital? Are other possibilities for our lives even conceivable? Clearly, these questions are intimately tied to the existence of every one of us. Now, let us step into the magnificent and bloody story of the Empire of Cotton. We will see that the rise of the Cotton Empire is the rise of capitalism and the formation of the modern world. We now inhabit a globalized world driven by economy and consumption, where our casual conversations are filled with salaries, brands, and international travel. And the key to it all, surprisingly, is a simple tuft of cotton. We will focus on three main parts. First, the rise of European capitalism originated with a breakthrough in the cotton industry. The origins of capitalism and globalization are far earlier than we imagine, born not of a technological revolution, but forcibly carved out through colonial warfare. Second, by the 19th century, a vast cotton empire centered on Europe, especially Britain, was established. Yet its core remained violence, oppression, and slavery. The American South, with its massive slave population, became the empire's lifeblood, and competition in the cotton textile industry ultimately ignited the Civil War. The abolitionist movement, in turn, spurred a new wave of globalization. Third, in the 20th century, as old guard European manufacturers declined, large Western corporations that controlled global networks took over the cotton industry, shaping our daily lives without us even noticing. First, let's look at how cotton transformed from an ordinary crop into the key commodity that ignited the Industrial Revolution. And how did it launch Europe's era of a cotton empire? Before the 11th century, Europeans knew almost nothing about cotton. From the Bronze Age to the Middle Ages, they wore clothing made of linen, animal hides, or wool. Imported cotton fabric was extremely rare, so distant and mysterious that medieval legends depicted cotton as a peculiar vegetable lamb, a plant that bore tiny sheep on its branches, which grew quietly by day and bent down at night to drink from nearby streams. As Mahatma Gandhi once said, "When the people of India were weaving cloth from cotton, the people of Europe were still living in a state of barbarism and desolation." Cotton cultivation originated in three separate regions: South Asia, East Africa, and Mesoamerica. With suitable climates, each region developed its own cotton farming and textile techniques, trading within their respective areas. The textile skills of the Indians were particularly advanced, envied by Arabs and Europeans alike. However, the cold climate made it difficult for cotton to grow on the European continent. It wasn't until the 12th century, through the Crusades, that Europeans briefly controlled some cotton-producing areas in the Middle East, giving rise to the first textile mills in northern Italy. But with the rise of the Ottoman Empire, this supply chain was once again severed. In the three major cotton-producing regions, the industry had developed steadily and slowly as part of a peasant subsistence economy, never displacing food crops. What changed everything was that most pivotal of historical events, the opening of new sea routes. In 1492, Columbus's arrival in the Americas gave Europe its future most important source of raw cotton. In 1497, Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope, opening a new route to India. Next, Beckert introduces a core concept: war capitalism. Its essence is slavery, the exploitation of indigenous peoples, imperial expansion, and armed trade. We typically think of modern capitalism as beginning with the Industrial Revolution around 1780. But Beckert argues that an earlier form, war capitalism, had already emerged in the 16th century. It took place not in factories, but in fields. It relied not on machinery, but on the forcible seizure of land and labor, especially from Africa and the Americas. This expropriation generated enormous wealth and new knowledge, which in turn strengthened European states and institutions, laying the foundation for future economic takeoff. In short, capitalism did not originate from a technological revolution within Europe. It was forged through colonial warfare. War capitalism divided the world into an inside and an outside. The inside was the realm of European law and order. The outside was the vast expanse of imperial control, filled with the massacre of native peoples, the plunder of resources, and slavery. European success in the cotton industry wasn't due to technological superiority, but to their ability to construct a new global network. Using cotton cloth woven by Indian workers to trade for slaves in Africa, transporting those slaves to plantations in the Americas, and shipping the resulting agricultural products to European markets. In 1600, the British East India Company was founded, with the Dutch following close behind. These were not companies in the modern sense, but armed trading entities characterized by coercive rule. They were a hybrid of soldiers and merchants who seized ports by force. To support this long-distance capital operation, Europe refined its legal systems, gave birth to new industries like insurance and finance, and developed powerful systems of government financing and national defense, all distinct features of capitalism. War capitalism stands in contrast to the industrial capitalism that emerged after the Industrial Revolution of 1780. But this violent, bloody, early form of capitalism was not replaced. Instead, it became the very foundation of industrial capitalism. Beckert uses the example of British merchant Samuel Gregg. In 1784, he built a cotton mill in Manchester equipped with the latest water-powered spinning frames, employing orphans as laborers and using raw materials from the Caribbean. This appears to be a microcosm of the Industrial Revolution, but behind it lay the global network of war capitalism. Gregg's family fortune came from a Dominican sugar plantation with hundreds of black slaves. His investors were his uncles, who were West Indian plantation owners. His raw cotton was procured by his wife's family from Jamaica and Brazil. His finished products were sold partly in Europe, partly shipped to the West African coast for the slave trade, and partly sent back to his own Dominican plantation for the use of the black slaves he owned. His factory was the forerunner of countless sweatshops to come. Female and child laborers worked 14-hour days, sleeping briefly in cramped huts. During the Industrial Revolution in Britain, workers who left their jobs without permission were imprisoned. To crush unions, the government even temporarily suspended the Habeas Corpus Act. Radical labor leaders were either publicly hanged or exiled to Australia. These nameless laborers were swallowed by the tide of history. In one Manchester cemetery, 40,000 cotton workers lie buried in unmarked graves, as if it were the final step in an industrial process. While exploiting labor, capitalists embraced new technology. The machine production of the Industrial Revolution drastically lowered the price of textiles. By 1830, the price of a pound of British yarn was only about one-third that of equivalent quality yarn from India. India was transformed from a textile-producing nation into a raw material supplier and consumer market, plunging its economy into crisis. By the late 19th century, famine had caused tens of millions of deaths in India. Meanwhile, the industrial empires of Britain, the United States, and continental Europe established their global dominance through the cotton textile industry. Next is the second part, the turning point for the empire of cotton in the 19th century. At this time, the cotton empire was heavily dependent on violence and slavery, and the American South, with its vast slave population, became the empire's lifeblood. However, internal competition within the cotton industry ultimately triggered the American Civil War. After the war, the abolitionist movement forced major powers to develop new cotton sources and labor systems, pushing capitalism in a new direction. By the 19th century, to feed the ever-growing appetite of their machines, European merchants turned to the nascent American South. With its fertile land and cheap slave labor, the region produced high yields of quality cotton, quickly becoming the ideal source of raw material. The slave trade consequently multiplied several times over. Before the war, the American South was the artery of the cotton empire. The American Civil War became a turning point in the history of capitalism. In the 19th century United States, the industrial conditions of the North closely resembled those of England, and it rapidly developed its own cotton textile industry. To protect its domestic industry, the North wanted to raise tariffs to block cheap British goods, a move fiercely opposed by Southern plantation owners. At the same time, the North believed that the backward institution of slavery was tying up the labor force needed for industrial growth. The conflict between these two economic models ultimately ignited the war. During the Civil War, American cotton exports collapsed, causing a cotton famine. In Lancashire, England, unemployment hit 25%, factories shut down, and workers rioted in the streets. To restore the cotton supply from the American South, Britain even came close to declaring war on the Union. The war forced Britain to turn its gaze to the Middle and Far East, accelerating the globalization of cotton. Britain built extensive roads and railways in India, extending its influence into the countryside and seizing complete control of India's raw cotton production. Russia, meanwhile, turned Central Asia into its own cotton city. In 1865, the cannons on the North American continent fell silent, and the greatest upheaval in the history of the cotton empire came to an end. After this conflict, slavery, the core of the empire, was no longer sustainable. Nations began to experiment with new labor systems like sharecropping and indentured servitude. More importantly, the crisis taught capitalists that this immensely profitable global trade network could only be maintained by the power of a strong state. Even The Economist, the staunchest advocate for free markets, conceded that state power was necessary to ensure the supply of cotton. Finally, let us look at the third part, the birth of a new cotton empire. In the 20th century, the old European empires and their manufacturers fell into decline, but the cotton industry did not die. Consumer society's demand for cotton fabric only grew. So, who took over the empire of cotton? After the American Civil War, European nations were forced to seek new sources of cotton around the globe, which in turn drew more regions into the wave of globalization. Emerging powers like Japan and the Ottoman Empire also joined in, with Japan turning Korea and Northeast China, and the Ottomans turning the Middle East into their own sources of raw cotton. This greatly weakened Britain's position in the global cotton economy. At the same time, a wave of anti-colonial resistance swept the globe. Because the cotton textile industry employed the most labor and had the closest ties to foreign capital, it became a key flashpoint for nationalist and socialist movements. From the textile workers in the Russian Revolution to the catalyst of China's May 30th movement, the fatal shooting of labor leader Gu Zhanghong at a Japanese-owned cotton mill in Shanghai, the cotton industry repeatedly became a historical trigger. In Europe and America, labor union struggles were more peaceful but still led to a steady rise in labor costs, which ultimately dismantled the Western European cotton empire from within. After World War I, British cotton production plummeted. By the 1950s, the landscape from Liverpool to Manchester was dotted with abandoned textile mills. Beckert paints a picture of a landmark year, 1963. That year, the Beatles made their American television debut. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, and a major dam in India became operational, capable of irrigating nearly 2.8 million acres of cotton fields. It was also in 1963 that the once mighty Liverpool Cotton Association auctioned off all its furniture, and the last glimmer of the old cotton empire faded away. However, a new kind of cotton empire was rising. To cut costs, developed nations moved their textile factories to the Third World, drawing countries like China, India, and Vietnam further into the global cotton economic system. By 2012, China and India alone accounted for 50% of the world's raw cotton exports. The center of the global cotton industry had shifted from Europe to Asia. This is a global network that appears streamlined but is incredibly complex, and its masters have quietly changed. Today, control lies not with manufacturers or cloth merchants, but with giant retailers like Walmart and Carrefour. They connect contractors, farmers, spinning mills, and sweatshops, ensuring the lowest costs and fastest speeds by making them compete against one another. The constant geographic and institutional reorganization of the cotton empire points to the very essence of capitalism, its unfailing ability to adapt to crises and find a new way forward. Here, the book story draws to a close. Cotton, as an economic crop, is both a commodity closely watched by traders on futures exchanges and a must-have item snapped up during influencer live streams. We still live in a vast empire of cotton, it's just that the stories behind it are now little known. What we can see is that as technology advances, cotton fabrics have been stratified into different grades, symbolizing differences in status and class. And where do all those fast fashion garments from H&M and Uniqlo, designed to be worn for only a season, end up? Historians tell us that the life we have today did not come easily. Perhaps the next time we walk into a Zara or Uniqlo and see the new arrivals or seasonal sale tags, we will feel something different. Let's briefly recap today's key points. First, Beckert introduces the concept of war capitalism, arguing that Europe forged a global trade network through colonial warfare and violence, which laid the foundation for industrial capitalism. The rise of the cotton empire is a microcosm of early capitalism. Second, the American Civil War and the resulting cotton famine forced Europe to expand the cotton industry into deeper corners of the globe and to recognize the critical role of state power in maintaining global supply chains. Third, in the 20th century, The European cotton empire disintegrated due to national liberation movements and rising labor costs. It was replaced by a new cotton empire dominated by large Western retailers, which turned Asia into the new manufacturing center and continues to shape our lives. That's all for today.